A racist boss blocks a qualified black woman from moving up, then freezes in shock when he learns her father isn't just any businessman. He owns the entire company. Imani Jackson's heels clicked against the polished marble floor as she walked through the lobby of the Pinnacle Marketing Group. The glass and steel building stood tall in downtown Chicago, its gleaming exterior reflecting the morning sun. Eddie Dye, 29. Imani had already accomplished what many people spent their entire careers chasing. Her MBA from Northwestern University opened doors, but it was her natural talent for marketing that kept them open. She nodded to the security guard as she tapped her badge against the sensor. The elevator whisked her up to the 30th floor, home to Pinnacle's top marketing teams and their impressive client list of Fortune 500 companies. The doors opened to reveal a modern office space with clean lines, glass walls, and stunning views of Lake Michigan. "Morning, Imani," called Jesse, the receptionist. "Big day today, right?" Imani smiled, adjusting the leather portfolio under her arm. "You know it. Interview at 10. 3 years of preparation had led to this moment. 3 years of exceeding every target, bringing in clients that competitors had chased for decades, and creating campaigns that won industry awards. The senior account manager position was finally open, and Imani was more than ready. As she walked to her office, Imani passed the wall of framed magazine covers featuring Pinnacle's most successful campaigns. 2 of them were hers, a sportswear campaign that increased the client's sales by 43%, and a rebranding for a struggling tech company that was now thriving. She had earned this promotion. Imani set her things down in her office and checked her appearance in the small mirror she kept in her desk drawer. Her natural hair was styled in a neat, professional twist. Her charcoal gray suit was perfectly tailored. Her mother had taught her early, "You have to be twice as good to get half as far." Her phone buzzed with a text message. "Good luck today. You've got this." Dad, Imani's relationship with her father was complicated. Charles Williams had left when she was 7, starting another family across town. They had reconnected when she was in college, and he was trying to make up for lost time. Sometimes she lets him. Other times, like today, his support felt like too little, too late. She put her phone away and pulled out her presentation materials. Her mind drifted back to her childhood, her mother working 2 jobs to keep them in a decent neighborhood with good schools. The scholarships Imani had earned through relentless studying. The internships she'd won through sheer determination. No one had handed her anything. Everything she had, she'd earned. The executive floor, where her interview would take place, was 2 floors up. In the 3 years Imani had worked at Pinnacle, she had noticed that while the lower floors were relatively diverse, the executive level remained overwhelmingly white. There were some exceptions. The head of HR was a Latina woman, and there was one black man who directed the digital department. But the most powerful positions were held by people who looked nothing like her. Robert Whitman, the director of client services, had been with Pinnacle for 15 years. At 50, his silver hair and custom suits projected authority and old-school success. He had a reputation for being tough but fair. Imani had always found him a bit distant, but she had impressed him with her work. At least, she thought she had. The senior account manager position had opened when Jennifer Landon left to start her own agency. The job posting listed requirements that seemed written with Imani in mind. 5 years of experience, she had 6. Proven ability to bring in new clients, she'd secured 3 major accounts last year alone, and a track record of successful campaigns. Her portfolio spoke for itself. Imani had spent weeks preparing for the interview. She stayed late to finish her regular work so she could spend evenings refining her presentation. She created a comprehensive plan for growing Pinnacle's client base in emerging markets. She had even mentored 2 junior staff members to show her leadership skills. Ready to crush this? Imani looked up to see Maya, one of the few other black women at Pinnacle, standing in her doorway. "As ready as I'll ever be," Imani replied, gathering her materials. "Just heard Thomas is interviewing too," Maya said, raising an eyebrow. Thomas Parker had joined Pinnacle 18 months ago. His work was solid, but not exceptional. What he lacked in experience, though, he made up for in connections. His father played golf with Pinnacle's CEO, and Thomas regularly joined senior executives for drinks after work. "May the best candidate win," Imani said with more confidence than she felt. At exactly 10 a.m., Imani knocked on the door to the conference room. Robert Whitman sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 other executives. Papers were spread out before them, resumes and performance reviews. Imani's interview had officially begun. "Imani, good to see you," Robert said without standing. "Let's get started, shall we? We have a busy day ahead." For the next 45 minutes, Imani presented her vision for the senior account manager role. She highlighted her successes, outlined her growth strategy, and answered questions with detailed, thoughtful responses. But something felt off. Robert checked his watch several times. When Imani mentioned her innovative approach to the TechStream campaign, he interrupted. "Yes, that was interesting, but we're concerned about how you'd handle our more traditional clients," he said. "They expect a certain type of representation." "I've worked with clients across industries," Imani replied, keeping her voice even. "My satisfaction ratings are consistently above 95%. "Numbers aren't everything," Robert said dismissively. "It's about fit, cultural fit." One of the other executives shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I believe I've demonstrated my ability to connect with all our clients," Imani said, pushing forward. "The Morrison account specifically requested me after their initial meeting." "That was a younger company," Robert countered. "Our legacy clients have different expectations, perhaps with more seasoning." More seasoning. The phrase hung in the air. Imani had 6 years of experience. Thomas had less than 2. The interview ended 10 minutes early. Robert promised they'd make a decision by the end of the week, but something in his tone told Imani that the decision was already made. 3 days later, the announcement went out in the company-wide email. "We're pleased to announce that Thomas Parker has been promoted to Senior Account Manager. Please join us in congratulating Thomas on this well-deserved advancement." Imani stared at her computer screen, the words blurring as she read them over and over. Thomas Parker. Less experienced, lower performance metrics, but apparently a better fit. Her phone rang. It was her father. "I just heard from Rick's kid who works at Pinnacle. Is it true? They passed you over?" Imani didn't answer right away. She was too busy wondering how many more times she would have to be twice as good for half the recognition. Imani closed her office door and sank into her chair. The email announcing Thomas's promotion still glowed on her computer screen. Her chest felt tight. It wasn't just disappointment. It was a familiar pain she had experienced too many times before. She picked up her phone. "Dad, I can't talk right now. I'll call you later." She ended the call before he could respond. For a few minutes, she just sat there, breathing deeply, trying to calm the storm inside her. Then she picked up her phone again and dialed a different number. "Mom, do you have a minute?" 20 minutes later, Imani had explained everything. The interview, Robert's comments, about cultural fit, and Thomas getting the promotion despite his lesser qualifications. "I'm not surprised," her mother said softly. "When I was up for department head at the hospital, They gave it to Bill Stevens. He had half my experience, but the board said he had leadership qualities. That was code for being a white man. Did you handle it? Imani asked. I kept doing excellent work. Eventually, they couldn't ignore me anymore. Her mother paused. But that was 20 years ago. You have options I didn't have. Dad wants to help, Imani admitted. He knows people on the board. And how would that make you feel, using his connections? Imani sighed. Like I'm betraying everything I've worked for. I've always succeeded on my own merit. I don't want special treatment. I just want fair treatment. After hanging up, Imani stared out her office window at the Chicago skyline. She had built her career brick by brick, through hard work and determination. Using her father's connections, felt like admitting the system was so broken that merit didn't matter. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. I heard, Zoe said, stepping inside and closing the door. Zoe Rodriguez was one of the few Latina executives at Pinnacle. They had bonded over being the only women of color in many meetings. It's complete garbage. Everyone knows you deserved that promotion. Robert said I needed more seasoning, Imani replied. Zoe rolled her eyes. Classic. When I was up for promotion last year, Henderson told me I needed to be more assertive. Then in my next review, he said I was too aggressive. You can't win. It's not just this promotion, Imani said, opening her desk drawer. She pulled out a notebook. I've been keeping track. The notebook contained dates, times, and detailed descriptions of incidents over the past 3 years. March 15th. Client assumed I was an assistant during the presentation. Robert did not correct them. June 8th. Presented social media strategy in Silentida team meeting. Thomas presented the same ideas 2 days later in an executive meeting and received credit. October 30th. Received feedback that I was intimidating to colleagues after challenging budget cuts to my campaign. Smart, Zoe said, flipping through the pages. Documentation is key. That night, Imani stayed late at the office. When everyone had gone home, she pulled up the company's diversity report, a document rarely discussed but published annually, to meet corporate governance requirements. The numbers told the story clearly. While 38% of entry-level positions were held by people of color, only 7% of leadership roles were. In the past 5 years, only one person of color had been promoted to senior management. The statistics confirmed what she already knew. This wasn't just about her, it was a pattern. The next morning, Imani sent an email to Robert. I'd appreciate the opportunity to discuss the senior account manager decision. Are you available this afternoon? His response came an hour later. My schedule is quite full. Can we touch base next week? Imani walked directly to his office instead. His assistant wasn't at her desk, so Imani knocked on his door. Imani, Robert said, looking up with surprise. I thought we were meeting next week. I believe this conversation is important enough to have today, Imani said, sitting down across from him. I'd like to understand why I wasn't selected for the senior account manager position. Robert leaned back in his chair. These decisions are complex. Thomas demonstrated the qualities we're looking for in that role. It's about cultural fit as much as performance. I'd like to understand what cultural fit means in this context, Imani said calmly. She pulled a folder from her bag. My performance. Metrics exceed Thomas's in every category. My client satisfaction scores are consistently higher. I've brought in more new business. She laid the papers on his desk. Clear, irrefutable evidence of her superior performance. Robert barely glanced at them. Numbers don't tell the whole story, Imani. Thomas connects with our clients in a way that's difficult to measure. Is it possible, Imani asked carefully, that your perception of who connects with clients is influenced by factors other than actual client feedback? Robert's face hardened. Are you suggesting that race played a role in this decision? I'm suggesting that unconscious bias may have influenced the evaluation process. I think you're being oversensitive, Robert said, his voice cooling. Thomas simply fits better with our client base. Perhaps marketing isn't the right field for you if you're going to take business decisions personally. The dismissal was clear. The conversation was over. Thank you for your time, Imani said, gathering her documents. She maintained her professional composure, though inside she was seething. Her next stop was the HR department. Lisa Chen, the HR director, welcomed her warmly, but her expression changed when Imani explained the reason for her visit. I understand your frustration, Lisa said carefully. But promotion decisions are complex. I'm sure Robert had valid reasons. I'd like to file a formal complaint about potential discrimination in the promotion process, Imani said firmly. Lisa's discomfort was visible. You should know that any complaint will be reviewed by our HR committee, which includes Robert's brother-in-law, James Whitman. The system was designed to protect itself. Imani thanked Lisa and left, the realization settling heavily on her shoulders. The crisis point. That evening, Imani sat on her apartment balcony, watching the lights of Chicago flicker on as the sun set. She had put 3 years into Pinnacle, building her reputation and portfolio. Walking away would mean starting over somewhere else, where the same biases might exist. Staying meant fighting a system that was stacked against her. Her phone rang. It was her father again. This time she answered. Hi, Dad. Imani, I'm sorry about what happened. Rick told me the details. It's not right. Imani sighed. No, it's not. I know some people on Pinnacle's board, he offered. One phone call? Dad, no, Imani interrupted. I appreciate it, but that's not how I want to succeed. I understand, he said, surprising her. What can I do to support you? The question caught her off guard. Growing up, support from her father had been inconsistent at best. Just listen, she said finally. That's enough for now. They talked for almost an hour, about the promotion, about the patterns she'd documented, about her frustration. He didn't offer solutions or judgments. He just listened. After they hung up, Imani felt stronger somehow. Sharing the burden had lightened it. The next morning, a company-wide email appeared in her inbox. Pinnacle Marketing Group is pleased to announce that we are in preliminary discussions with Global Communications, Inc. regarding a potential acquisition. Representatives from Global will be visiting our offices next week to evaluate our operations and client portfolio. All staff are expected to put their best foot forward during this important visit. A second email followed from Robert to the senior team. I'll be leading the presentation to Global's executives. Thomas will present our client portfolio. All department heads should prepare detailed reports. Imani, please ensure the conference room is prepared with coffee and materials. Coffee and materials. While Thomas, who had been in the job for less than a week, would present to potential buyers. Imani stared at the email, a strange calm settling over her. This wasn't just about a promotion anymore. This was about her dignity, her value, and her future. She thought about her mother, who had persevered in the face of similar barriers. She thought about her conversation with her father, who had offered support on her terms. She thought about Zoe and others who faced the same challenges every day. Imani took a deep breath and made her decision. She would not quietly prepare coffee. While Thomas presented her work, she would not accept being sidelined or undervalued. She would stand her ground, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been told they didn't quite fit despite their excellence. The morning of the investor meeting, Pinnacle's offices buzzed with nervous energy. Staff hurried through hallways, clutching folders and laptops. The cleaning crew polished every surface until it gleamed. Even the usual morning chatter in the break room was replaced by hushed, tense conversations. Imani arrived an hour early. She wore her most powerful outfit, a deep blue tailored suit she had splurged on after landing the Morrison account. Her mother had always told her to dress for the job you deserve, not the job you have. Today, she dressed like an executive. She was reviewing her notes when Robert appeared at her office door. "Imani, the coffee service hasn't arrived for the conference room," he said without greeting. "Can you call them and then set up the presentation materials? Make sure there are water bottles at each seat. The fancy glass ones, not plastic." Imani looked up calmly. "I've asked Sarah from the admin team to handle that. I'll be attending the meeting as a team member." Robert's face tightened. "That's not the plan. Thomas will present our client portfolio." "Thomas has been senior account manager for 4 days," Imani replied. "He didn't work on most of those accounts. I did." "This isn't a discussion," Robert said, his voice dropping. "Don't create a scene, Imani. It won't help your career here." "Is that a threat?" Imani asked, maintaining eye contact. Robert sighed, with exaggerated patience. "It's advice. Be a team player." "I am a team player," Imani said. "I'm making sure our company puts its best foot forward with potential investors. I have something valuable to contribute to this discussion." Robert shook his head and walked away, muttering something about attitude problems. Imani took a deep breath. She had made her decision. There was no turning back now. At exactly 10 a.m., the elevators opened and 5 people in expensive suits stepped onto the executive floor. Leading the group was a tall, distinguished black man with silver at his temples. Charles Williams, CEO of Williams Communications Group, moved with the confident air of someone used to commanding attention. Imani watched from her office as Robert rushed forward, hand extended. "Mr. Williams, what an honor to have you visit." "Pinnacle," Robert gushed. "We're thrilled about the potential partnership between our companies." "The honor is mine," Charles replied smoothly. "I've heard excellent things about your team's work." Robert beamed, completely unaware of who he was really speaking to. The confrontation. The boardroom was Pinnacle's most impressive space. Floor to ceiling. Windows offered a panoramic view of Chicago. A massive oak table dominated the center, with leather chairs arranged around it. Digital screens lined the walls, ready to display presentations. Robert sat at the head of the table, with Thomas to his right. Imani took a seat farther down, ignoring Robert's pointed look. The investors filed in, with Charles Williams taking the seat directly opposite Robert. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert began, "Pinnacle Marketing Group has been a leader in strategic marketing for 15 years. Our client list includes some of the most prestigious brands in the country." Slides appeared on the screens, showcasing impressive statistics and client logos. Robert spoke confidently about the company's achievements, growth projections, and plans for expansion. "We pride ourselves on our people," he continued. "Our team represents the best talent in the industry." "Speaking of talent," Charles interrupted smoothly, "what can you tell me about your diversity initiatives? How do you develop and retain diverse staff?" Robert paused, clearly caught off guard. We value diversity, of course. We have several initiatives in the planning stages to address that area. Planning stages, Charles repeated. And your current diversity numbers? I don't have those figures at my fingertips, Robert admitted, but I assure you we're committed to improvement. Charles nodded, his expression neutral. I'd like to hear from some of your team members who work directly with clients. It's important to me to understand the talent we'd be acquiring. Robert smiled tightly. Of course, Thomas Parker, our new senior account manager, can speak to our client relationships. Thomas stood, adjusting his tie nervously. Thank you, Mr. Whitman. As senior account manager, I oversee several key accounts. He began describing the TechStream campaign, the very one Imani had developed and executed. He stumbled over details about the strategy and couldn't answer a specific question about the metrics. It was a multi-platform approach, he said vaguely, that resulted in significant growth. Interesting, Charles said. His eyes moved down the table. I'd also like to hear from... He consulted his notes with a show of casualness. Imani Jackson. I understand she's handled some of your most successful campaigns. Robert's smile froze. Imani is part of our account team, but Thomas can address any specific questions. Actually, Charles interrupted, pointing to the screen. According to this client testimonial I'm reading in your own presentation, it was Ms. Jackson who revolutionized our approach to market engagement. I'd like to hear from her directly. All eyes turned to Imani. Robert had no choice but to nod stiffly. Imani stood, calm and prepared. Thank you, Mr. Williams. The TechStream campaign was indeed challenging because they were losing market share to larger competitors. For the next 10 minutes, Imani outlined her strategy, implementation, and results. She spoke with confidence and clarity, answering questions with specific details and insights. The investors leaned forward, engaged and impressed. That's exactly the kind of innovative thinking we value, Charles said when she finished. It makes me wonder. He turned to Robert. I understand Ms. Jackson was recently passed over for promotion to senior account manager despite these impressive results. Could you explain that decision? The room went silent. Robert's face flushed. Promotion decisions involve many factors beyond individual campaigns. It's about leadership, cultural fit. Cultural fit, Charles repeated. Interesting phrase. In my experience, that often means looks and thinks like existing leadership. Would you agree? Robert shifted uncomfortably. That's not what I meant. At all. Thomas simply had qualities that aligned better with our senior management vision. And what qualities were those specifically? Charles pressed. Well, his communication style, his approach to client relationships. Robert was floundering now, aware that something was very wrong but unable to identify what. Perhaps, Imani said, her voice calm but carrying clearly across the room. Mr. Whitman would be more comfortable explaining why he felt the daughter of Charles Williams wasn't qualified for a senior position at a company her father is considering acquiring. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Robert's face drained of color as he looked back and forth between Imani and Charles, the resemblance suddenly obvious. Your daughter? He choked out. Charles's expression remained neutral, but his eyes were steel. I believe in evaluating companies on their merits, not just their balance sheets. How they develop and value talent tells me everything I need to know about their future potential. He turned to Imani. Though I should clarify that my daughter has never used my name or connections to advance her career. This is the first time I've intervened in any way. She insisted on making her own path. Robert looked like he might faint. "There's been a misunderstanding," he stammered. "We value Imani tremendously. Perhaps we should revisit the promotion." "Decision." "Perhaps," Charles said, standing. "We should revisit the acquisition discussion altogether." The boardroom fell silent. No one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning and Robert's quick, shallow breathing. "Mr. Williams, there's clearly been a misunderstanding," Robert finally stammered. "Imani is one of our most valued team members. We were planning to promote her in the next cycle." "Were you?" Charles asked mildly. "That's not what the documentation suggests. One of the other investors, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper suit, leaned forward. "What documentation?" Charles nodded to Imani. She opened her portfolio and removed several papers, passing them around the table. "These are my performance reviews over the past 3 years," Imani explained calmly. "Consistently exceeding targets, client testimonials specifically requesting to work with me, and comparative metrics showing my results against others at my level." She laid another document on the table. "This is the company's own diversity report, showing a clear pattern of stagnation in promoting people of color to leadership positions." The executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked embarrassed. Others stared at the papers, with calculating expressions, already considering how this affected their own positions. Thomas stared at the table, his face red. Zoe, who sat near the back, couldn't hide a small, satisfied smile. "I think," Charles said, "the executive team and I should have a private conversation about company culture and practices. Ms. Jackson has raised important concerns that go beyond her individual situation." Imani stood, straightening her jacket. "Thank you for the opportunity to present my work today. I'll excuse myself so you can continue your discussion." Her voice remained professional and steady. She had made her point. She didn't need to witness Robert's humiliation. As she left the room, she felt oddly calm. Whatever happened next, she had spoken her truth. Personal resolution, Imani was at her desk, organizing files, when Charles appeared at her office door an hour later. "Quite a meeting," he said, closing the door behind him. "I didn't plan for it to happen like that," Imani said. "I just couldn't stay silent anymore." Charles sat down across from her. "You've never been one to stay silent when something matters. Even as a little girl, you spoke up." "I didn't know you'd be the investor," Imani admitted. "When I saw you walk in, I almost left." "Would you have preferred I recuse myself?" Imani considered the question carefully. "No. But I need you to understand something. If changes happen here, they can't just be for me. They need to be systemic." Charles nodded. "I agree completely. In fact, that's what I just discussed with the board. Any acquisition will be contingent on Pinnacle implementing comprehensive diversity and inclusion programs with measurable outcomes." Imani felt a wave of conflicting emotions: pride in what they might accomplish, discomfort at using family connections, relief that something good might come from this difficult situation. "You know," Charles said more softly, "I've always been proud of you. The way you insisted on making your own path, even when I offered to help. Your mother raised an extraordinary woman." "She did," Imani agreed. "I should call her." Later that evening, Imani sat on her balcony with her phone, explaining everything to her mother. "So your father came through," her mother said, surprise evident in her voice. "He did, but not in the way I expected," Imani replied. "He's using his position to push for changes that will affect everyone, not just me." "And how do you feel about that? About using the family connection after all?" Imani watched the Chicago skyline, thinking. I worked hard. I earned everything I've achieved. But I'm starting to think that success isn't just about personal merit. It's about changing the system so that merit actually matters for everyone. That sounds like wisdom to me, her mother said softly. Transformation and closure. 3 months later, Pinnacle Marketing Group looked different. Not just in personnel, but in energy. The acquisition had gone through with significant conditions. Robert remained at the company but had been moved to a different role away from personnel decisions. He was required to complete extensive bias training and work with a diversity mentor. His demotion wasn't about punishment, Imani had insisted, but about growth and appropriate placement. Imani now occupied a corner office as the newly created Senior Director of Client Strategy, a position higher than the one she'd originally sought. But more important than her title was the change she was helping to create. The mentorship program is showing promising results, Imani explained, standing at the head of the conference table. The board members, including Charles, listened attentively. Retention of diverse talent has improved by 22% in just 1 quarter. She clicked to the next slide. And client satisfaction has actually increased since we implemented more diverse client teams. Dr. Pilar Vasquez, the new Chief Diversity Officer, nodded in agreement. Clients appreciate seeing teams that reflect the diversity of their customers. It's good business. After the meeting, Imani led a workshop for junior staff. She had insisted that her new role include time for mentoring. As she explained brand positioning strategies, she noticed a young black woman taking detailed notes. In the back row. Tasha, right? Imani asked after the session ended. You had great questions about the Morrison campaign. Tasha nodded, clearly surprised to be remembered. I've been studying your work. The way you blend data analysis with creative storytelling is amazing. I'm starting a mentorship circle for young marketers, Imani said. We meet Thursdays after work. You should join us. Really? Tasha's eyes widened. That would be incredible. I wish I'd had something like that when I started, Imani said. It makes a difference to have support. That evening, Imani met Charles for dinner at a small restaurant near the office. Their relationship had evolved over the past months. Weekly dinners had become a tradition, a chance to connect not just as father and daughter, but as professionals, with mutual respect. The board approved all your recommendations, Charles said. The numbers speak for themselves. It's a start, Imani replied. Real change takes time, but I'm seeing differences already. People speak up more in meetings. Different perspectives are being valued. Charles studied his daughter's face. You could have left, you know. Started fresh somewhere else. Why did you stay and fight? Imani smiled. Because change doesn't happen if everyone who faces barriers leaves. Sometimes you have to stand your ground and make the system better for those who come after you. As she looked around the restaurant, Imani felt a sense of purpose, stronger than any career ambition. One person speaking up had created ripples that were already changing the company. Those ripples would extend outward, affecting other companies, other industries, other lives. It wasn't just about her promotion anymore. It was about transforming a workplace so that true merit could be recognized, regardless of what someone looked like or where they came from. That was a success worth fighting for. 1 year later, Imani stood at a podium, accepting the American Marketing Association's Leadership Excellence Award. The spotlight felt warm on her face as she looked out at the audience. This award recognizes not just my work, but the power of speaking truth, she said. I faced barriers. In my career, as many do. I also had privileges that helped me overcome them. education, support, and yes, family connections. She gestured to where Charles sat in the front row. Today, I'm announcing the Williams-Jackson Foundation, providing scholarships and internships for underrepresented groups in marketing. Because success should be determined by talent and hard work, not by who you know or what you look like. The applause rose around her. As Imani stood confidently at the podium, she knew her personal triumph had become something bigger, a doorway for others to follow, and perhaps someday walk through without having to fight quite so hard.